She was my quiet secretary until one mistaken night made me see who she really was. Hello, everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's go back to our main character. Adrian Ward had built an empire from glass, chrome, and sleepless nights. Every floor of his company mirrored his precision. Quiet, efficient, detached. To the world, he was the definition of control. But to those who worked closest to him, he was untouchable. His secretary, Ava Lane, was the only one who never tried to impress him. She didn't flatter, didn't pry, didn't speak unless necessary. For 2 years, she had been the silent rhythm behind his empire, showing up early, staying late, remembering his meetings, his preferences, even the way he liked his coffee. Black, no sugar. She was invisible, yet essential. And maybe that's why he never really saw her. That Thursday night was supposed to be routine. A contract dinner with investors, a glass of whiskey he wouldn't finish, a car waiting outside. But something went wrong. Hours later, the building was nearly empty. Rain streaked across the tall windows, the hum of the city fading into the night. Ava was still in her small office, typing the last lines of a report, when she saw him through the glass. Adrian, still at his desk, shoulders slumped, tie loosened, staring at the flickering screen. He looked human for once. She hesitated, then knocked softly. "Sir, it's almost midnight. You should go home." He didn't answer. The smell of whiskey lingered faintly in the air. His voice was lower than usual, roughened by exhaustion. "Do you ever wonder," he murmured, "if it's all worth it?" Ava froze, unsure if he was speaking to her or himself. "What do you mean?" she asked quietly. Adrian looked up, eyes a shade darker than she'd ever seen. "The empire. The endless meetings. The silence when you finally get home." His words trailed off, and for a moment, the distance between CEO and secretary vanished. She stepped closer, setting a file on his desk. "Maybe it's not about worth," she said softly. "Maybe it's about not forgetting who you were before all this." He stared at her, as if truly seeing her for the first time. The rain hit harder against the glass, and a power flicker dimmed the lights. For a heartbeat, the room felt suspended in something raw. Two lonely people standing on opposite sides of a wall they'd both built. Then suddenly, the phone on his desk buzzed. A news alert. A private document leak. His name attached. He stood abruptly, his chair scraping the floor. "Who accessed my drive?" he demanded. Ava blinked, startled. "No one, sir." Someone did. Tonight." His tone sharpened, but behind the anger was fear. She crossed to the computer, scanning the log, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "It's not an external hack," she said. "It's an internal backup bug. I can fix it." He watched her, the precision in her movements, the calm that never wavered, even when his world seemed to shake. Within minutes, the red alert on the screen disappeared. "Done," she whispered. "You're safe." Silence hung heavy, broken only by the steady rhythm of rain. He exhaled, long and slow, his voice quiet. "Thank you, Ava." She looked up, surprised he had never said her name like that before. Something flickered in his expression, something unguarded. "You should get home," he said finally, though his voice had softened. She nodded, gathered her things, and left his office, unaware that this night, this small, mistaken moment of vulnerability, had just rewritten everything between them. And Adrian Ward, the man who thought he could control everything, would soon discover that the only person who truly saw him was the one he had never noticed. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the glass walls of Ward Enterprises, turning every reflection into polished silver. Adrian Ward sat behind his desk, the same calm mask in place, but something inside him felt off balance. He had not slept much. The memory of Ava standing in the rain-lit office, her steady hands on the keyboard, her quiet voice saying, "You are safe," replayed in his head more than he wanted to admit. She was efficient as always that morning, walking in with his schedule and a fresh report. "Good morning, Mr. Ward," she said softly, setting a folder down. "Your meeting with the board is at 10. He nodded, avoiding her gaze. "Thank you, Ava." His voice sounded colder than he intended. She gave a polite smile and left, her footsteps almost soundless against the marble floor. For the first time, he found himself watching her leave. She moved with precision, not a hint of arrogance, not a trace of manipulation. And yet, after last night, he could not stop wondering who she really was beneath that calm. Later that day, the board meeting began. Adrian's tone was sharp, his words exact. The company had just survived a security scare, and he wanted answers. As the directors debated protocols and liabilities, his attention drifted toward the end of the table where Ava was taking notes. Every now and then, her eyes lifted, meeting his for a second before she looked away. There was something steady about her gaze, like she knew how to survive storms quietly. When the meeting ended, Adrian stayed behind, pretending to review documents. He was really thinking about how she had fixed what an entire tech team had missed. She had not bragged, not even hinted at what she had done. Why would someone that capable choose to stay invisible? By late evening, the office had emptied again. Adrian walked past her desk and paused when he saw her still working, her hair falling over her shoulder, her fingers typing calmly. "You are still here," he said. Ava glanced up. "The Q4 report needed revisions. I wanted it ready for your review." He leaned on the edge of her desk, curious despite himself. "You could have gone home. No one would have blamed you." She smiled faintly. "Sometimes, it feels easier to stay where things make sense." He frowned slightly. "The office makes sense to you?" She looked up, her eyes soft. "It is predictable. People here are busy building things. Out there," she gestured toward the city lights. "Out there feels too uncertain." Something about her honesty disarmed him. He studied her face for a moment before speaking. "You said last night that maybe it is about remembering who you were before all this. Who were you before this, Ava?" She hesitated, her expression unreadable. "Someone who thought working hard could fix everything." Her words lingered in the air, quiet but weighted. Before he could respond, her phone buzzed with an alert. A reminder flashed across her screen: charity event. Saturday. Children's art program. Adrian caught a glimpse of the name before she locked it quickly. "You volunteer?" he asked. She looked embarrassed. "Just sometimes. It is not important." "It seems important," he said, surprising himself. Ava stood, gathering her files. "It helps me remember that not everything is about profit." He nodded slowly, realizing she was teaching him something without even trying. As she walked away, her reflection trailed against the glass wall, fading into the city's glow. That night, alone in his penthouse, Adrian looked out at the skyline and thought of her words. Maybe that was what he had lost, the simplicity of doing something that mattered without expecting a return. Somewhere between ambition and emptiness, his quiet secretary had reminded him that purpose was not written in contracts. It lived in moments of choice. And he had a feeling that this was only the beginning of a truth he was not ready to face. 2 days later, the company prepared for the quarterly investor dinner. The event was to be held at the Glass House, a high-rise venue with a panoramic view of the city, all elegance and sharp edges, just like Adrian Ward himself. Every executive was required to attend, including Ava. She had spent the afternoon finalizing the seating chart and briefing the catering staff. her professionalism unwavering even under pressure. But when she stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows that night, watching the reflection of the skyline ripple against the glass, something in her felt different. Adrian arrived late, his presence commanding as always. Dark suit, perfect posture, eyes scanning the room with calm precision. Yet when he spotted her by the window, his stride slowed almost imperceptibly. "You coordinated all this?" he asked when he reached her. "Yes, sir," she replied. "Everything should run smoothly." He nodded, but his gaze lingered. "It looks remarkable." She blinked, unsure if she had heard a compliment or a statement. "Thank you," she said softly. For a few moments, they stood in silence, surrounded by the murmur of conversation and the gentle clinking of glasses. Then the room filled with investors, and the rhythm of the evening began. Throughout dinner, Adrian delivered his speech with practiced ease, every word deliberate. But behind that composure, his mind kept flicking back to the woman who sat at the edge of the room, quietly observing, her hands folded neatly in her lap. When he concluded, polite applause filled the air. As guests mingled, a senior investor approached Ava. "Miss Lane, I must say, you have done a wonderful job tonight," the man said with a smile that was too confident, too lingering. She forced a polite smile. "Thank you, sir." But as he leaned closer, his tone shifted. "Perhaps we can discuss your future with the company privately sometime." Ava's breath caught. Before she could respond, a voice cut through the noise. "That will not be necessary." Adrian's tone was firm, almost cold. He had appeared behind her without warning. "Mr. Kent, I believe you have another meeting waiting," Adrian said smoothly, his stare unwavering until the man backed away. When he was gone, Adrian turned to her, his voice low. "You should not have to tolerate that." Ava looked down. "It happens sometimes. I am fine." His jaw tightened. "You should not have to be." There was something in his eyes, anger, yes, but also something protective, something that unsettled her. "Thank you," she whispered, "for stepping in." He nodded once. "You do not owe anyone silence, Ava." The way he said her name again, slow, deliberate, made her heart stutter. The music changed, softer now. Someone dimmed the lights, and the reflection of the city lights shimmered on the glass walls. She excused herself, needing air, and stepped onto the balcony. The night was cool, the wind brushing strands of hair across her face. A few seconds later, the glass door slid open behind her. Adrian stepped out, holding 2 glasses of water. "I thought you might prefer this to champagne," he said. She smiled faintly. "You remember?" "I remember more than you think," he said quietly. They stood side by side, the hum of traffic below, mixing with the faint sound of laughter inside. "Do you ever wish you could start over?" she asked suddenly. "Walk away from everything and just breathe?" He thought for a long moment before answering. "Once," he admitted. "But when you build something your whole life, you forget how to live without it." She nodded. "Maybe starting over does not mean erasing what you built. Maybe it just means building differently." He looked at her, really looked, and for the first time, he saw not an employee but a person, someone who had her own dreams, her own quiet strength. "You make it sound simple," he said softly. "It is not," she replied, "but it is worth trying." The music inside swelled, and the glass doors opened again. A photographer called for a group picture. Adrian glanced at her and smiled slightly. "Come on, Miss Lane. Let them see the real strength behind this company." She hesitated but followed. The flash went off, freezing them side by side in a frame that would later appear in every business magazine, an image that looked perfectly professional. But what the photo could not capture was the quiet realization forming in both of them. Something had shifted, and neither of them could go back to the way things were before. The following week unfolded quietly, but something had changed between them. Ava tried to bury herself in her routine, pretending that the moment on the balcony had not existed. that the way Adrian had looked at her was simply gratitude, nothing more. Yet every morning when she brought him his black coffee, his eyes lingered a second too long. And every time she handed him a file, their fingers brushed just enough to stir something unspoken. The entire office felt the shift, even if no one dared to mention it. Rumors were currency in corporate hallways, and soon whispers began to float about late nights, about the photograph from the gala, where they had stood side by side, about how the once untouchable Adrian Ward had started smiling, even if only slightly. Ava ignored it, or tried to. She had worked too hard to let gossip define her. But when she overheard two assistants whispering her name in the break room, her heart sank. "He probably promoted her for reasons that have nothing to do with her skills," one of them said. Ava turned quietly and left before they could see the hurt on her face. Later that afternoon, she stood outside Adrian's office, holding a report but hesitating to knock. Through the glass, she could see him pacing, phone pressed to his ear, his expression sharp. "No," I said, "no new press interviews," he said firmly. "The board can speculate all they want, but I will not explain personal rumors." He hung up, rubbing his temples, then looked up and caught her standing there. "Come in, Ava." She stepped inside, setting the file on his desk. "The quarterly summary," she said, her voice quieter than usual. He studied her for a moment. "You heard the rumors." She nodded. "It is fine. It will pass." "It is not fine," he said, his tone heavier. "They do not know you." She smiled faintly, though her eyes betrayed exhaustion. "They do not have to." His gaze softened. "I do." The words slipped out before he could stop them. For a moment, neither moved. Then, as if realizing the weight of what he had just said, Adrian turned slightly away, clearing his throat. "There will be an internal audit next week," he said, shifting back to business. "Some board members want to review all executive communications." "Including mine?" she asked. "Including everyone's," he replied, but his hesitation gave him away. "They think the security breach last month was not a glitch. They think someone inside staged it." Ava froze. "That is impossible." "I know," he said quietly, "but someone wants to use it to push you out." She frowned. "Me? Why?" "Because you are the easiest target. Because they saw how I looked at you." The silence that followed was thick, charged with things neither of them could name. She finally spoke. "Then I will resign." "No," he said sharply. "You will not take the blame for something you did not do." She held his gaze. "If it protects you and the company, I will." "Ava," he said, stepping closer, his voice lower now, almost pleading. "You have spent years proving yourself in a world that never wanted to see you. Do not disappear because of someone else's fear." Her breath caught. No one had ever spoken to her that way, with conviction, with belief. She whispered, "Then what do we do?" He looked at her for a long moment before answering. "We find out who is behind this. Together." It was the first time he had said "we" about anything other than work. As the evening deepened, they stayed in the office long after everyone had left, combing through data logs, tracing access codes, piecing together what really happened that night weeks ago. When the system had nearly been breached, at some point, their shoulders brushed, and she felt his warmth beside her. It was not the kind of closeness born of impulse. It was built on trust, the quiet kind that sneaks up when two people fight for something greater than themselves. Outside, the city lights blurred into streaks of gold. Inside, two people who once lived by rules were beginning to break them without even realizing it. For the first time in years, Adrian did not feel alone in his empire of glass. And for the first time ever, Ava did not feel invisible. By Monday morning, the quiet partnership between Adrian and Ava had turned into something that neither of them could easily define. They had spent the weekend exchanging late-night emails, comparing files, and searching through encrypted archives that revealed one unsettling truth after another. Someone inside the company had indeed tampered with the system logs and then carefully planted traces pointing toward Ava. Whoever it was, they were smart enough to hide behind multiple layers of authorization. As dawn broke over the skyline, Adrian leaned back in his chair, exhaustion shadowing his face. "They want to bury you to reach me," he said quietly. Ava sat across from him, her fingers wrapped around a mug of coffee, gone cold. "Then we have to show them we are not afraid," she said, her tone steady, even though her pulse raced. He studied her for a long time before replying. "You always speak like someone who has already survived the worst." She smiled faintly. "Maybe I have." For the first time, he wanted to ask what that meant. But before he could, his phone buzzed with a message from the board secretary. There would be a surprise audit that morning. No warning, no preparation. Adrian looked at Ava. "They are moving faster than I thought." Ava straightened. "Then let us be ready." The next few hours unfolded in tense silence. Board members arrived with their legal advisors, accompanied by a small team from compliance. Questions were sharp, eyes suspicious. Adrian answered calmly, his tone controlled. But every time they directed an accusation toward Ava, his jaw tightened. She responded with clarity and confidence, explaining the system sequence she had fixed weeks ago, presenting the log copies she had stored offline, an act that now turned out to be her saving grace. When she handed them over, one of the board members raised an eyebrow. "So, you made personal copies of confidential data?" Adrian's voice cut through before she could respond. "On my instruction," he lied smoothly. "I asked her to prepare backups for redundancy." A pause followed. No one challenged him. When the board finally left, Adrian closed the door and exhaled. "You just saved the company again," he said quietly. Ava shook her head. "You just risked your position for me." "It was worth it," he said simply. She looked at him, her heart catching on the unspoken meaning. "You should not have to protect me, Mr. Ward." "Maybe I'm not doing it for you," he replied. And the silence that followed was louder than any confession. Later that evening, as the city lights began to flicker on, Ava stood by the window in her small apartment, staring at the reflection of the skyline. Her phone vibrated. A message from Adrian appeared on the screen. "I need you to see something. Now." 10 minutes later, she was in his office again, breathless from the rush. He turned his laptop toward her. "Look at this." On the screen, an internal transaction record showed that someone from finance had rerouted charitable foundation funds under a false project name, one linked to the same night the breach occurred. "They wanted to destroy you as a distraction while they stole from the foundation," Adrian said, his tone sharp with realization. "And I signed those authorizations because they forged my signature." Ava's eyes widened. "Who would have access to that level?" Adrian's face darkened. "Only someone I have known for years." The weight of betrayal hung heavy between them. "We can take this to the authorities," she said carefully. "Not yet," he replied. "If we go too soon, they will erase everything. We need proof." "Then, what do we do?" she asked. "We build a case quietly," he said. "And when the time comes, we expose them together." She hesitated, then nodded. "Together?" she repeated softly. For a long moment, they simply stood there, side by side. Two people once bound by hierarchy, now united by truth. The night outside shimmered like glass, and in the reflection of the window, their silhouettes stood close enough to touch, but still held back by the line they both knew existed. And yet, as Adrian looked at her, he realized that line was starting to blur. The quiet secretary he once overlooked was now the one person he trusted with everything he had to lose. And though neither of them said it aloud, they both knew something irreversible had already begun. The next few days moved like a storm building in slow motion. Adrian and Ava met in secret every evening, long after the office had emptied, working quietly to trace the missing foundation money. They discovered a network of shell accounts linked to one of the company's longest-serving executives, Martin Cole, Adrian's chief financial officer and one of his most trusted mentors. The realization hit Adrian like a betrayal he never saw coming. "He helped me build this company," he said one night, staring at the glowing spreadsheet on his screen. "He was the one who stayed when everyone else doubted me." Ava watched him from across the table, her voice gentle but firm. "And that is why he knew exactly how to hurt you." Adrian rubbed his temples, exhaustion etched into his face. "If this leaks, the media will destroy everything we have built." "Then we do not let it leak," Ava said. "We expose him the right way with proof, not emotion." He looked at her, the tension in his jaw softening slightly. "You always sound so sure." "Because someone has to be," she replied. For a moment, the silence between them felt almost fragile. Then he smiled faintly, the kind of smile that looked foreign on him. "You really are fearless, Ava." She shook her head. "No, I just learned not to run when things matter." That night, as she gathered her files to leave, he caught himself watching her again, not as an employee, but as a person who had somehow become the calm inside his chaos. When she reached the door, he said softly, "Be careful, if Martin suspects anything." She turned back, her expression composed, but her voice steady. "He will not. I have done this before." Adrian frowned. "Done what before?" She hesitated. "Found corruption. It cost me my last job." He studied her, realization dawning slowly. "That is why you never talked about your past." "There was nothing left to talk about," she said quietly. "I was right, but I lost everything anyway." His chest tightened at the thought. "You will not lose this time," he promised. "Not while I am standing." The next morning, Adrian called for a board meeting. Martin Cole arrived, confident as ever, unaware that the ground beneath him was beginning to shift. The presentation was clinical. At first, financial graphs, quarterly projections, compliance updates. Then Adrian switched the slide. "There is one more issue," he said, his tone calm, but his eyes hard. "An irregularity in our foundation accounts." The room fell silent. Martin's smile faltered. "I am sure it is a simple accounting error," he began. Adrian leaned forward. "Then you will not mind explaining these transfers." He tapped the remote, and the projector displayed a detailed chart of diverted funds and forged authorizations, all linked to Martin's ID. The older man's face drained of color. "This is absurd," he stammered. "Where did you get this information?" Adrian's voice was steady. "From someone who still believes this company can stand for something honest." The meeting dissolved into chaos. Board members whispering, phones buzzing. Within an hour, legal counsel arrived, and Martin was escorted out. The damage was contained, the truth undeniable. After the room emptied, Adrian stood at the window, hands in his pockets, staring out at the skyline. Ava entered quietly. "You did it," she said. "No," he replied, turning toward her. "We did." She gave a small, tired smile. "You should go home, Mr. Ward." "I do not want to," he said simply. The words hung between them, startlingly honest. She hesitated, unsure how to respond. "Ava," he said again, stepping closer. "You could have left when they blamed you. You could have let me fight this alone." "I do not walk away from people who trust me," she said softly, "even when it hurts." He looked at her for a long time, then whispered, "You are the only person who ever made me want to be better." Her breath caught, and she looked down quickly, her voice barely audible. "Then start by sleeping. You look like you have not in days." He laughed quietly, the tension finally breaking. "Only if you promise not to quit." She smiled then, a small, genuine smile that reached her eyes. "Deal." When she left that night, Adrian stayed by the window, watching her disappear into the city lights. For the first time in years, victory did not feel empty. It felt alive, because she was part of it. And deep down, he knew that somewhere between suspicion and trust, between duty and something far more fragile, he had crossed a line he could never uncross. The scandal with Martin Cole broke through the business press within 24 hours, even though Adrian had tried to contain it. The headlines were ruthless, twisting every detail into a story of betrayal and incompetence. By noon, the company's stock began to dip, and calls poured in from partners demanding explanations. Ava watched from her desk as the storm unfolded, her heart aching for Adrian. He had done the right thing, but now he was paying the price. By the end of the day, the board requested an emergency session without him. When he returned to his office that evening, his tie hung loose around his neck, his expression unreadable. "They want me to step aside temporarily," he said. Ava froze. "They cannot do that. You saved this company. They can, and they will. They say it is to protect the brand." His voice was calm, but beneath it was exhaustion that went beyond sleepless nights. "Maybe they are right," he added quietly. "Maybe I let everything slip too far." "That is not true," Ava said, stepping closer. "You did what no one else had the courage to do. You exposed the truth." He gave a faint, humorless smile. "The truth does not pay the bills, Ava." "Maybe not," she replied, "but it pays something more important, self-respect." For a moment, their eyes met, and in that silence, words became unnecessary. She wanted to tell him that he was not alone, that she believed in him more than anyone else ever had. But before she could, his phone buzzed again, a message from legal counsel. He sighed. "They are finalizing the interim leadership vote tomorrow. I will need to clear my office." "Then let me help," she said firmly. That night, long after everyone had gone, she stayed to help him pack the files, the awards, the photographs that once symbolized a life of achievement. When she lifted a framed picture of him with the early team, she smiled sadly. "You built all of this from nothing," she said. "Do not let them make you feel like it means nothing." He took the frame from her hands, his fingers brushing hers. "It only means something, because you reminded me what it should stand for." The weight of his words hung in the air. She turned away, pretending to organize folders, her pulse unsteady. "You should rest," she said softly. "Tomorrow will be hard." "Ava," he said quietly. She turned back. "Yes? If things go wrong tomorrow, if they force me out completely, I want you to leave too." Her brows furrowed. "What?" "No, I am not walking away. You have too much to lose if you stay," he said. "They will come after you next." "Let them," she replied. "I can handle it." His voice dropped lower. "I will not let them destroy you because of me." "You cannot decide that for me," she said, her tone firm, but her eyes soft. "I make my own choices, remember?" He stared at her for a long moment. And in that silence, everything he felt was their gratitude, admiration, and something deeper that neither dared to name. The next morning, the board vote was swift and merciless. Adrian was officially suspended as CEO, pending review. As he walked out of the boardroom, flashes from cameras outside the building lit up the lobby. Reporters shouted questions. Security guards blocked the entrance. And through it all, Ava stood by the elevator, waiting for him. He met her eyes and exhaled. "You should not be here." "And miss the chance to walk out with my boss?" she asked gently. "Never." They stepped into the elevator together, the doors closing behind them. For a long time, neither spoke. When they reached the ground floor, he turned to her. "I do not know what comes next," he admitted. "Then let us find out," she said simply. As they stepped out into the cold afternoon light, surrounded by the chaos of reporters and flashing cameras, it was the first time in his life that Adrian Ward had nothing left to hide. Behind no title, no power, no walls. But when Ava reached for his hand, just briefly, before letting go, he realized he still had something left. Hope. The weeks that followed were quiet but heavy. Adrian Ward had disappeared from the headlines, his name replaced by speculation and corporate statements filled with empty words. The company he had built kept running under interim leadership, but to those who had known its true heart, something essential was missing. Ava found herself working from home for a few days. unsure whether she still had a place there. Then one afternoon, her phone buzzed with a message she never expected. It was from Adrian. "Meet me. Same cafe as before." She hesitated, her heart skipping a beat. The cafe was small, tucked away on the corner near the old library, the place she used to grab his coffee every morning. When she arrived, he was already there, dressed simply in a dark coat and sweater, his usual guarded expression, replaced by something softer, almost uncertain. "You came," he said quietly as she sat down. "You asked," she replied. For a moment, neither spoke, the hum of conversation around them, filling the silence. Finally, he sighed. "They finalized the sale of my shares this morning. I am officially out." "I am sorry," she said, meaning it more deeply than she expected. "Do not be," he said, his eyes meeting hers. "Maybe this is what I needed. To stop being a machine." She tilted her head. "And start being what?" He smiled faintly. "Human, I guess. Someone who still believes in what he built." Ava leaned back, studying him. "So what now?" "Now," he said, "I start again but differently. I want to rebuild the foundation program. Not as a corporate asset, as a real community project." She blinked, surprised. "You still want to work for the same cause that nearly destroyed you?" "It did not destroy me," he said. "It reminded me why I started." He hesitated, then added, "And I want you to help me lead it." Ava's breath caught. "Me? Adrian? I am not—" "You are exactly who I need," he interrupted. "You understand people. You care about things that matter. You are the only person I trust to tell me when I am wrong." She looked down, her hands clasped together. "It will not be easy." "Nothing worth doing ever is," he said quietly. "Besides, it feels strange starting over without the person who taught me how to." The words settled between them. Fragile, but real. After a long pause, she smiled faintly. "All right, but only if we do this right. No more secrets. No more walls." He nodded slowly. "Deal." Over the next few weeks, they worked side by side again. This time, in a small rented office, in a shared workspace downtown. No assistants, no titles, no glass walls, just two people rebuilding something that mattered. Ava handled outreach and community partnerships, while Adrian focused on funding and logistics. At first, it felt awkward, stripped of the hierarchy they had once lived behind. But soon it became natural. He laughed more. She challenged him more. They fought sometimes, but always for the right reasons. One evening, after a long day of meetings, they found themselves alone in the quiet office. The sun had set, leaving only the glow of city lights through the windows. Adrian was reviewing proposals when Ava walked over, holding 2 mugs of tea. "You never did like coffee that much," she said, smiling. He chuckled. "Maybe I just liked the person who brought it." Her breath hitched, and for a moment, neither moved. Then he spoke again, softer this time. "You know, when everything fell apart, I thought I had lost everything that mattered. But then I realized I still had what mattered most." "What is that?" she asked quietly. "You," he said simply. The world seemed to still. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. No longer boss and secretary. No longer two people defined by a contract. "Adrian," she whispered, "are you sure this is not just gratitude?" He shook his head slowly. "No, gratitude fades. This does not." She looked at him, and for the first time, let herself believe it could be true. Outside, the city lights flickered like distant stars. And somewhere deep inside, both of them understood this was no longer a story about loss or redemption. It was about two people finally finding each other in the quiet after the storm. A year later, the air inside the converted warehouse buzzed with quiet excitement. The old space had been transformed into the new headquarters for the Silent Wings Foundation, the project Adrian and Ava had built together from nothing but faith, persistence, and second chances. Volunteers moved through the halls, hanging art pieces made by children from underfunded schools, while community leaders mingled near the stage. The foundation was celebrating its first anniversary. And tonight's event was more than a milestone. It was a symbol of everything they had fought for. Ava stood by the stage, clipboard in hand, organizing the final details. Her hair was pinned loosely, her expression calm but warm, the way it always was when she was in control. A voice behind her made her turn. "You are still working," Adrian said, walking up in a dark suit that made him look every bit the man he used to be. Except now, there was something different piece. "Someone has to make sure you do not skip the speeches," she replied with a teasing smile. "I would not dare," he said, smiling back. For a moment, they simply looked at each other, the noise of the crowd fading into background music. "You know," he said quietly, "a year ago I thought I had lost everything, but losing the company was the best thing that ever happened to me." She tilted her head, curious. "Because it led you here?" "Because it led me to you," he said simply. She shook her head, though her cheeks flushed slightly. "You always know what to say." "Only because I learned from the best," he replied, his eyes soft. When the lights dimmed, Ava stepped aside as Adrian took the stage. The audience quieted. He spoke not as a businessman, but as a man who had finally learned what purpose meant. "A year ago," he began, "I believed success was measured by what you own. But now, I know it is measured by what you give back. This foundation was born out of failure, but it became something far greater than I could have imagined. And it exists because someone reminded me that integrity matters more than reputation." His gaze found Ava in the crowd. "She taught me that." The room erupted in applause, but Ava's eyes glistened with emotion. After the ceremony, guests filtered out, leaving the two of them standing among the soft hum of cleanup. The lights above the stage cast a golden glow across the room. "You were incredible up there," Ava said quietly. "I meant every word," he replied. "You gave me back the part of myself I thought was gone." She smiled. "You did the same for me. I used to think I had to stay invisible to survive. Now, I finally feel seen." He stepped closer, his voice low. "You were never invisible, Ava. I was just too blind to notice." She looked up at him, her heart steady but full. "So what now?" she asked. "Now," he said, pulling a small envelope from his pocket. "I ask you one last question." Her brow furrowed as she opened it. Inside was a letter, the very same kind of paper she used to leave him notes on when she was still his secretary. Only this one had just 2 words. "Marry me." She looked up, speechless. "Adrian, I know we have both been through storms," he said, his voice shaking slightly for the first time. "But every time I lost my way, you were the one who reminded me where home was. I do not want to build anything without you again." For a long second, she said nothing. Then she smiled through tears. "You never learned to ask questions properly, did you?" "Is that a no?" he asked softly. "That is a yes," she said, laughing through her tears. The room around them seemed to fade, the lights dimming, the sound of soft music echoing through the air. He reached for her hand, and she did not hesitate this time. Together they stood at the center of the place they had rebuilt from ruin. Proof that love, like trust, was something you earned through action, not status. And as the night fell over the city, Adrian Ward kissed the woman who had once been his quiet secretary, now his partner, in every sense of the word. In the end, the only contract that mattered was the one written not on paper but in the heart.